There is a kind of silence that lives inside a person. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. The silence of someone who has everything to say and has chosen, every single day, for years, to say none of it. It is the heaviest silence there is. It does not announce itself. It does not ask for sympathy. It simply lives there, quietly, behind the smile, behind the birthday cards, behind the I love you said, at the end of every phone call. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that should stop all of us, is that the person carrying it looks completely normal. They show up to Christmas dinner. They help plan the wedding. They sit in the third row of the church, and they watch the man walk his daughter down the aisle. And they know something about that daughter that the daughter does not know about herself. And they smile. And they say nothing. Miriam Grace Adler smiled through 23 years of that silence. She did not choose the secret. She did not create it. It was handed to her on a phone call at 11 o'clock on a humid Tuesday night in August of 1999 by the one person in the world she could never say no to, and she carried it through everything that followed, through birthdays and graduations and holidays and grief and a wedding, until a Tuesday afternoon in March of 2023, when a DNA test that cost $49 and took 4 minutes to process ended 23 years in a single breath. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is the story of Miriam Grace Adler, her sister Joanna, a man named Carl Whitfield, a woman named Nadia, and a secret that was never anyone's to keep in the first place. This is a story about what we do to the people we love when we decide that protecting them means lying to them. It is a story about the promises we make in the dark and what those promises cost everyone around us in the light. And it is a story about a Tuesday afternoon that nobody in this story will ever recover from. Not entirely, not fully, no matter how long they live. There are 3 things I want you to hold on to as we go through this together. The first is a question about loyalty. When someone you love hands you a secret and makes you promise to keep it, a secret that is not yours, that you did not create, that will affect people who have no idea it even exists. What exactly do you owe the person who asked? And what do you owe the people who were never given the chance to ask anything at all? The second thing I want you to hold is the image of a man. His name is Carl Whitfield. He is 58 years old. He coached his daughter's soccer games from the time she was 5 years old. He helped her with every science project she ever had to turn in. He danced with her at her wedding in September 2019. He wept at the altar when she walked toward him on that day in her dress, not from sadness, but from the specific overwhelm of a father who has spent 20 years watching someone become everything he had hoped they would become. Carl Whitfield loved his daughter with everything he had, and he had been lied to about her since before she was born. The third thing I want you to hold on to is harder than the other two, because the third thing is the question this entire story is built around, and I am not going to give it to you now. I am going to let the story earn it, because by the time we get there, by the time we have sat with Miriam and Joanna and Carl and Nadia and understood what each of them was carrying, the question will land differently than it would if I told it to you now. Trust me on that. Miriam Grace Adler was born on a cold February morning in 1972 in Dayton, Ohio. The elder of 2 daughters born to a high school history teacher named Gerald Adler and a woman named Ruth who worked part-time at a pharmacy and full-time at holding the family together in the particular quiet, capable way that certain women of that generation learned to hold things together without ever being thanked for it. Gerald was thoughtful and measured and deeply in love with American history in the way that only people who genuinely believe it matters can be. He quoted Abraham Lincoln at the dinner table. He made his daughters learn the names of every president before they were 10. He believed that understanding where things came from was the only way to understand where they were going. Ruth was warmer and funnier and occasionally impatient with Gerald's tendency to turn every conversation into a lesson. But she adored him. The house they built together in Dayton was modest. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard with a garden Ruth maintained with the same quiet consistency she brought to everything, and it was full of the kind of ordinary love that does not make headlines but holds families together for decades. Miriam arrived first, and from the very beginning, she was the steady one. Careful, organized, The kind of child who read the instructions before opening the box, who at 7 years old was already keeping her room the way an adult keeps a room, everything in its place, everything accounted for. Her teachers called her mature for her age, which is the way adults describe children who have learned to take up very little space and carry more than their share. She was not unhappy. She was simply the kind of person who understood, earlier than most, that the world runs better when someone is paying attention. She studied library science at Ohio State University and graduated in 1994. She took a job at an elementary school in Columbus, Ohio, shelving books and running reading programs, and helping small children discover that stories could take them places their lives had not yet taken them. She would keep that job for 29 years. She never married, not from lack of opportunity, but from a particular kind of self-sufficiency that can make it difficult to need another person in the specific way that love tends to require. She lived alone in a 2-bedroom house on a quiet street in Columbus. She had her books, her garden, her routine, and her sister. Joanna Adler came into the world 17 months after Miriam, and she came in loud. Where Miriam was quiet, Joanna was everywhere, spontaneous, magnetic. The kind of girl who walked into a room and immediately became the reason people stayed in it. She had their mother Ruth's laugh, sudden and wide and completely unself-conscious, and a way of listening to people that made them feel genuinely interesting, even the ones who were not. She was not more loved than Miriam, in the way that second children sometimes are. But she was differently loved, with the particular helplessness that people feel towards someone who seems to burn brighter and faster than the world around them. Miriam adored her sister with a completeness that had nothing complicated in it, not rivalry, not resentment, just the simple, whole devotion of someone who has found their favorite person early and has never needed to look for another. Joanna studied communications at Ohio State and graduated in 1995, a year after Miriam. She was quick and funny and could talk to anyone. She got a job in marketing at a mid-sized company in Columbus and was good at it in the effortless way that naturally charming people are sometimes. Good at things. Not because they work harder, but because they understand intuitively what other people need to hear. In the summer of 1995, at a work function she almost did not attend because she was tired and had been about to cancel, Joanna met a man named Carl Whitfield. Carl Whitfield was 28 years old when he met Joanna Adler. He was an operations manager at a logistics company in Columbus. Methodical, precise. The kind of man who showed up 10 minutes early to everything and always knew where his keys were. He was not the kind of man who filled a room the way Joanna did. He was quieter than that, steadier, funny in a way that revealed itself slowly, like a room where the lights come up gradually rather than all at once. But once you understood Carl Whitfield, you understood that he was exactly the kind of person you wanted next to you when things went wrong. He did not panic. He did not perform. He simply figured out what needed to be done and then did it, without needing to be asked and without needing to be thanked. Joanna fell for him in the way that certain people fall for exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. Not because it is dramatic, but because it feels, suddenly, like rest. They married in 1997 in a small ceremony in Columbus. Miriam was the maid of honor. She stood beside her sister at the altar and watched Carl look at Joanna, the way Carl looked at everything that mattered to him, with steady, complete attention, and she thought, without reservation, that this was exactly right. By 1998, Carl and Joanna were ready to start a family, and that is where the first fracture appeared, not dramatically, not suddenly. In the quiet, grinding way that fertility struggles arrive, month after month of hope deferred, of appointments and tests, and the specific devastation of wanting something very badly that will not come. Carl handled it with the same steady patience he brought to everything. Joanna handled it the way Joanna handled everything that hurt, by not handling it at all until the weight became unbearable, and then handling it all at once in ways that sometimes frightened her. By the late spring of 1999, the distance between Joanna and Carl, unspoken, unnamed, the kind of distance that grows in the silence between two people who are both suffering but cannot find the language to say so, had become something that neither of them was addressing. They were not fighting. They were not separating. They were doing something quieter and in some ways more dangerous. They were drifting past each other in the same house, occupying the same rooms without really occupying the same life. It was in this climate, in this specific vulnerability, that Joanna attended her 10-year college reunion in late May of 1999. And there, at a table in the back of a rented venue in Columbus, she ran into Douglas Hale. Douglas had been Joanna's boyfriend for 2 years during university. The first person she had loved with the specific intensity of early adulthood, the kind of love that does not know yet how to protect itself, that gives everything without calculation, that leaves a mark that never fully disappears. They had ended badly. Not in the dramatic, conclusive way that makes endings clean. In the unfinished way, the way of two people who were too young to know how to complete what they had started, who separated without resolution and carried the incompleteness for years afterward without ever naming what they were carrying. They had dinner after the reunion. There was warmth there, and familiarity, and the particular ease that comes from knowing someone during a formative time. One dinner became another, and then something more. It lasted 6 weeks. Joanna ended it in early July of 1999. She went home to Carl. She recommitted to her marriage with the fierce, deliberate energy of someone who has just glimpsed how much they stand to lose and has decided they will not lose it. She told herself she would never tell Carl. She told herself she would carry this alone and let it be the thing that made her a better wife, a more present partner, a more intentional person. She believed this. And then in August of 1999, she took a pregnancy test, and her hands would not stop shaking while she waited for the result. The pregnancy confirmed what Joanna had hoped and feared in equal measure. She was carrying a child. The timing was close enough to be ambiguous, close enough that Carl could be the father, close enough that she could make herself believe it, close enough that she would never have to know for certain if she simply chose not to know. But there was Douglas. And there was the 6 weeks. And there was the specific arithmetic of a woman who knows her own body and knows, beneath the hoping, what the hoping is trying to cover. Joanna made a decision that night. She would not test. She would not investigate. She would not unravel the life she was rebuilding with Carl by introducing a question that, once asked, could never be unasked. Carl would be this child's father. In every way that she could control, Carl would be this child's father. She had already decided this when she picked up the phone and called Miriam. It was a Tuesday night in August. Humid. The kind of heat that makes a house feel smaller than it is. Miriam answered on the second ring. She could tell immediately from Joanna's voice that something was wrong. Not the ordinary wrong of a difficult day, but the specific wrong of something that has no good resolution. Joanna told her everything. Douglas, the 6 weeks, the ending, the pregnancy test. The decision she had already made. She was not asking Miriam what to do. She had already done it, in her mind. What she was asking Miriam for was something simpler and more devastating than advice. She was asking for a witness. For someone to hold what she was holding so that she did not have to hold it alone. And then she asked Miriam to promise. Never to tell Carl. Never to tell the child. Never to tell Douglas. To take this, just the two of them, and let it stay buried for as long as they both lived. Miriam was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that is not silence but thinking. Deep, real, weighted thinking. And then she said yes. She said it because Joanna was her favorite person, and the sound of her sister crying at 11 o'clock at night was something Miriam did not know how to refuse. She said it because she believed, in that moment, that she was protecting a family. She said it because she was 31 years old and had not yet learned what she would spend the next 23 years learning. That some promises do not shrink with time. They grow. They expand to fill whatever space is available. They become, over the years, the walls of the room you live in. In November of 1999, Joanna gave birth to a daughter. She and Carl named her Nadia. Carl Whitfield held his daughter for the first time on a gray November morning in a Columbus hospital room and wept in the specific, helpless way that men sometimes weep when they have wanted something for a very long time and are finally holding it. He pressed his face against the top of her head. He said her name out loud, quietly, as if testing it, as if making sure it fit. Miriam stood in the doorway. She watched Carl hold his daughter. She watched Joanna's face, exhausted, tender, complicated in a way that only Miriam could read from across the room. And she smiled. and she said nothing. She had made a promise. And Miriam Grace Adler kept her promises. That was the most important thing you could say about her. She kept her promises. Even this one. Even as the years began to accumulate and the weight of what she was carrying settled into something she no longer even noticed as weight. The way you stop noticing the furniture in a house you have lived in long enough. She kept it through Nadia's first steps, and first words, and first day of school. She kept it through every birthday party she attended, every school play she drove 4 hours to watch. Every summer weekend Nadia spent at Miriam's house in Columbus, reading books from Miriam's personal book collection and asking Miriam questions about everything. She kept it through the evening. Carl stood in the kitchen after Nadia's first school concert and said, warm and proud, that Nadia had his mother's eyes. Miriam looked at Nadia's warm brown eyes. Douglas Hale's eyes, she knew, though she had never said so, and said yes, she really does. She kept it through the afternoon. Nadia, at 16, sat across from Miriam at a diner and said with the frank curiosity of a teenager taking stock of herself that she did not look like either of her parents, that it was strange, that sometimes she felt like she did not quite fit. Miriam had put her hand over Nadia's hand and said, "You are your own person, and that is a gift." She believed it when she said it. She also knew what she was not saying. The years folded over each other the way years do when you are living inside them, not as a montage but as a series of ordinary days that only reveal their shape when you look back at them from a distance. Nadia grew up. She was her father's daughter in all the ways that mattered. Steady, methodical, with a humor that revealed itself slowly. She had Joanna's warmth, Joanna's ease in a room, Joanna's laugh. She graduated from Ohio State in 2021. She got a job in human resources at a healthcare company in Columbus. She met a man named Aaron Osei, who was kind and grounded and made her laugh at things she had not known were funny. They got engaged in 2018. The wedding was planned for September 2019. Joanna threw herself into the planning with everything she had. The venue, the flowers, the seating chart, the dress. She told Miriam it was the most fun she had had in years. She told Miriam, in one of their last long phone conversations before everything changed, that she felt grateful, that she felt like her life had turned out better than she deserved. Miriam had laughed at that. She had said Joanna was ridiculous. She had meant every word. On a Wednesday morning in March 2019, Joanna Adler Whitfield had a stroke at home. She was 47 years old. She was alone in the kitchen. She died before the ambulance arrived. Miriam got the call from Carl at 9:14 in the morning. She was at work, between the shelves, when her phone rang. She drove to Columbus that afternoon. She sat with Carl and Nadia in the hospital corridor after it was already over. She held Nadia while she sobbed. She helped Carl make the phone calls that no one ever wants to make, and through all of it, through all the grief and the arrangements and the long, empty weeks that followed, one thought ran underneath everything else, like a current she could not switch off. Joanna was gone. The only other person who had ever known was gone, and Miriam was the only one left who knew. The wedding went ahead in September 2019 as Joanna had planned it. Carl walked Nadia down the aisle. The venue was the one Joanna had chosen. The flowers were the ones Joanna had picked. Nadia wore a dress Joanna had cried over in a bridal shop 6 months before she died. At the altar, Carl placed his daughter's hand in Aaron's. He wept. Miriam sat in the third row and watched. She had sat with the knowledge for 20 years by that point. She had become someone who carried it without stumbling, or so she told herself. But in that moment, watching Carl weep at the altar, watching Nadia look at her father with that specific love that daughters have for the men who raised them, the love that is not contingent on anything, that does not require explanation, that is simply present because it has always been present. Miriam felt the weight of what she was carrying in a way she had not felt it in years. Sharp and clear and entirely without cushion, Joanna was gone. The promise had been made to a person who no longer existed. The person who had put this weight on Miriam's shoulders had left the room and left Miriam holding it alone, in the third row of a wedding, watching a man weep over a daughter whose biology he had never been allowed to question. Miriam went home that night and sat in her kitchen for a long time. She did not call anyone. She did not write anything down. She simply sat, and the question that she had been circling for 20 years, the one she had never been able to answer, sat across from her in the quiet. At what point, the question asked, does protecting someone become punishing someone else? Christmas morning of 2022, Aaron gave Nadia an Ancestry DNA kit, the kind that has become so ordinary in American households that it barely registers as a gift anymore. Millions of people have taken them. Most find distant cousins they never knew existed and consider it a pleasant surprise. Nadia received it with the casual delight of someone who is not expecting to find anything particularly revelatory. She was 23 years old. She had grown up knowing exactly who she was. She had a father who had coached her soccer games and helped her with her science projects and danced with her at her wedding. She had a mother she had loved and lost. She had an aunt who had been steady and present through every chapter of her life. She had no reason, not one single reason, to believe that anything in her story was other than what it had always appeared to be. She did the test in late January of 2023 out of idle curiosity. She mailed the kit on a Tuesday. She forgot about it, mostly, the way you forget about things that do not feel urgent. The results arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March. She was alone in the house. Aaron was at work. It was the kind of ordinary afternoon that does not announce itself. The kind where nothing about the quality of the light or the temperature of the air gives you any warning that you are about to become a different person than the one you were that morning. She opened the Ancestry app the way she opened it. She navigated to her results the way the app directed her to navigate. And then she sat with what she was reading for a very long time. The app was specific. It is always specific. It does not hedge or soften. It tells you what the science says and leaves the rest to you. Carl Whitfield did not appear anywhere. Not as a father, not as a half-match, not as a distant relative, not anywhere. A man named Douglas Hale appeared under a category in clear, plain language. Biological father, 50% DNA match. Nadia read it 3 times. She sat with her phone in her hands. Outside the window, the afternoon was the same as it had always been. Inside the room, nothing would ever be the same again. She did not call Aaron. She did not call Carl. She called the person she always called when she did not know what to do with something too large to hold alone. The phone rang twice. Miriam answered. Her voice was warm, the way it always was with Nadia. Easy and present, and without the performance that phone calls sometimes have. Nadia's voice was different. It was flat in a way that Miriam had never heard from her before. Not crying, not angry, but carrying the specific flatness of someone in shock who has not yet decided what shape their feeling will take. She said, Aunt Miriam, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. And then she said the name. Douglas Hale. The silence on Miriam's end of the line lasted 4 seconds. Nadia told people later that she counted them. 4 seconds. Miriam did not say anything. She did not deny it. She did not ask where Nadia had heard the name or what she was referring to, or any of the deflections that a person reaching for a lie might reach for. She was silent for 4 seconds. And those 4 seconds, before she said a single word, answered every question Nadia had not yet fully known how to ask. Miriam did not lie, perhaps because after 23 years, the weight of the secret had become too heavy to lift. One final time, perhaps because hearing Nadia's voice, the voice of the child she had watched grow into a woman, the child she had loved in the particular way that people love the children of the ones they have lost. Asking her for the truth made lying feel like the final, unforgivable cruelty in a story that had already cost too much. She said, Nadia, I am so sorry. And the silence that followed that was an entirely different kind of silence. It was the silence of something ending. Not the secret. The secret was already ended, the moment the app loaded. The silence of a relationship, an understanding, a version of the world that had held for 23 years and would now never hold again. What happened in the days and weeks after that phone call moved the way damage moves, not all at once but in waves, each one reaching a new shore. Nadia drove to her father's house on a Thursday evening in March 2023. She had thought about calling first. She had thought about asking someone to be there. In the end, she went alone because she felt that Carl deserved to hear it from her, directly, without an audience. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, where he had helped her with homework for 15 years. She told him everything. She told him what the DNA test had shown. She told him about the phone call with Miriam. She told him as much as she knew and was honest about how much she still did not know. Carl listened without speaking. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the kitchen window and stood there looking at something in the yard that Nadia could not see. He stood there for a long time. When he turned back, his face was the face of a man who has just been asked to reorganize everything he has ever understood about his own life and who has not yet found the architecture to do it. He said, "You are my daughter, and nothing about that has changed." And then he asked her gently to leave because he needed some time alone. He did not call Miriam that night. He has not spoken to Miriam since. He has not, as far as anyone knows, decided what to do with what he now carries, which is something that was done to him before his daughter was born, a lie installed so deep in the foundation of his life that pulling it out now means examining everything built on top of it. Carl Whitfield is 58 years old. He still goes to work every day. He still answers when Nadia calls. He is still, by every external measure, the man he has always been. But something in him shifted on that Thursday evening in March 2023, and the people who know him best say it has not shifted back. Douglas Hale is 54 years old. He lives in Portland, Oregon. He has been married for 16 years to a woman named Patricia. They have 2 sons, aged 14 and 11. He had not thought about Joanna Adler in years, not because she had not mattered, but because that was another life, another version of himself, long folded away. 3 weeks after Nadia's call to Miriam, he received a message through the Ancestry platform. A woman named Nadia Osei. She told him, in careful and precise language, that she believed she was his biological daughter, that she was 23 years old, that her mother had passed away in 2019, that she was not asking for anything, not his time, not his money, not a relationship, only for the truth, if he was willing to give it. Douglas Hale read the message twice. He called his wife. He sat at his kitchen table in Portland for a long time that evening, and then he replied within the hour. He told Nadia he had not known. He told her he was sorry she had grown up without that knowledge. He told her that he did not know what he could offer her, or what she would want from him, but that he was willing to find out if she was. They have spoken 4 times since then, carefully, slowly, the way 2 people begin to build something when neither of them is entirely sure what it is supposed to become or whether it will hold. Osei, Nadia's husband, has been steady through all of it with the particular quiet steadiness of a person who has decided that his job right now is simply to be present. But Nadia has said, in the months since, that she sometimes wonders if Aaron looks at her differently now. Not unkindly, just differently, as if the map of who she is has been redrawn and he is still learning the new geography. She says she understands the feeling completely, because she looks at herself differently too. Miriam Grace Adler lives alone in her 2-bedroom house on a quiet street in Columbus. She still works at the elementary school. She still tends her garden in the mornings before work. She has written Nadia 4 letters since that March afternoon. Nadia has replied to one, briefly, formally, in language that was not unkind but carried the specific distance of someone who loves a person and has been hurt by them and does not yet know where to put both of those things at the same time. Miriam did not defend herself in her letters. She did not offer explanations. She did not ask for forgiveness. She said only this: "I loved your mother more than I can say, and I loved you from the day you were born. I made a promise I should not have made, and I kept it longer than it deserved to be kept. I am sorry for everything it cost you to find out. I am sorry it cost you anything at all." She signed each letter the same way she had always signed her letters to Nadia, just her name. The way you sign something when you are not sure anymore what title you hold in someone's life. Now I want to come back to the question I promised you at the beginning, the third thing. The thing I told you the story needed to earn before I could ask it. I told you this story is about Miriam, about loyalty, about a promise made in the dark of an August night in 1999. And it is all of those things. But here is the real shape of it. Joanna died in March 2019. Nadia's wedding was in September 2019. 6 months between the death of the woman who held Miriam to that promise and the moment Carl walked his daughter down an aisle built partly on a lie. 6 months in which Miriam was, for the first time in 20 years, free. The promise had been made to Joanna. Joanna was gone. There was no one left to hold Miriam to it, and Miriam went to that wedding. She sat in the 3rd row. She watched, She smiled, and she said nothing. That is the moment this story turns on. Not 1999, not the phone call, not even the DNA test. That moment. Because in that moment, Miriam was no longer keeping Joanna's secret. She was keeping her own. She was keeping the secret of a woman who had carried something for 20 years and had become, in some way she could not fully admit to herself, the keeper of it, not just out of loyalty but out of habit, out of fear, out of the knowledge that putting it down now meant becoming the person who had broken everything, rather than the person who had held it together. We are all capable of this. That is what this story is really about. Not the secret itself. Secrets have been kept and revealed since the beginning of human life together. But the way a secret that begins as an act of love can become, over time, an act of self-protection. The way we tell ourselves we are shielding someone from pain when what we are really doing is shielding ourselves from the consequences of telling the truth. The way the thing we are carrying stops being something we chose and becomes something we simply are. Joanna made a decision in 1999 based on fear and love and the particular desperation of a woman trying to hold her marriage together. She did not expect a $49 DNA kit in 2023. She did not expect the algorithm. She did not expect that the science would eventually make every kept secret findable. But it did. It does. It will. There are currently more than 100 million DNA profiles in consumer ancestry databases. That number grows every year. Every kit sold is a potential unraveling. Every Christmas gift that seems like a fun thing to do together is a possible Tuesday afternoon that changes everything. The secrets people have kept for decades are not safe anymore. They never were, not truly, but now the mechanism for finding them is sitting in a box under the tree, wrapped in paper, waiting. Nadia Whitfield Osei is 23 years old. She is, by all accounts, doing the work of someone who has had the floor pulled out from under them and has decided, because there is no other option, to learn how to stand on what is left. She still calls Carl every Sunday. She still calls Miriam, occasionally, when something happens that she needs to tell someone who has known her whole life. Not often. Not with the ease that used to be there. But she calls. Because the extraordinary thing about human beings, the thing that this story reveals if you look at it long enough, is that we do not stop loving people simply because they have hurt us. We simply love them differently. Carl is still her father. Miriam is still her aunt. Douglas Hale is still a stranger she is slowly, carefully, learning how to know. And Joanna is still the woman she lost in March of 2019, 4 months before the wedding, the absence at every table ever since. The question I want to leave you with is not whether Miriam was wrong. She was. The keeping of it, particularly after Joanna died, was wrong, even if the original promise came from love. The question I want to leave you with is the one that does not have a clean answer. If someone you love, your closest person, the one you would do almost anything for, called you at 11 o'clock at night and handed you something like this, and asked you to promise, and was crying the way only that person can cry, what would you say? And if you said yes, if you made that promise, how long could you carry it before it stopped being a promise and started being a prison? That is what Miriam Adler's 23 years look like from the inside. Not a villain story, not a hero's story. The story of someone who loved someone completely and said yes before she understood what yes meant, and then spent 2 decades learning the difference between protecting someone and simply being too afraid to stop. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Would you have made that promise? And if you had, when would you have broken it? Tell me in the comments. Be honest. This is one of those stories where the honest answer is the interesting one. And if this story reached something in you, if it made you think about the secrets carried around you right now, in the people you love, in the families you think you know completely, then you already understand what this channel is about. Every story here is chosen because it is true in the way that matters, not always factually, but emotionally, psychologically, in the way that makes you sit back and think about your own life in a new light. Hit subscribe because the next story is already waiting, and it is going to ask you something you have never been asked before, where every story rewires your mind.